Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to our Facebook Live, the first of our Facebook Live videos here on July 1st, 1863. We're back up in the cupola of Schmucker Hall. We're going to be talking about Buford and Jerome and what they could see from up here on the first day of July, 1863. We're going to be coming to you all day with interesting stories and interpretations from the area around Seminary Ridge, the ground that I like to say was the longest occupied ground by one or the other army throughout the Battle of Gettysburg. As you watch the video, like, comment, let us know you're here. If you have any questions about what we're saying, ask them. I'll be checking the comments on Facebook as we go through the video. Share this with your friends. Let them know how you are interacting with Gettysburg today. July 1st, 1863, the first day of the battle. I'm here with Codie Eash. So I got it right this time. Codie Eash, our operations manager and our in-house guru on the cupola. And we're going to be talking a little bit about why this space is important, and we're doing it in real time. What were Aaron Jerome, the signal officer, what were John Buford seeing from up here? Why is this area important? Why do we offer tours? Why is this open to the public today? So let's just start by talking a little bit about what was going on at 9 o'clock in the morning on July 1st, 1863.
So this position here is one that the significance of it is identified by Aaron Jerome, by John Buford the evening before on June 30th. And they're positioned up here for some amount of time. Jerome will write a couple of basically reports or reflections in the aftermath of the Civil War. He tells him that John Buford told him to look out for campfires, especially to the west along the South Mountain range toward Cashtown, a little less than 10 miles in the distance. And he says that Buford is up here with him at one point in time, it seems, that evening as well. So this is a place with which both of these men are relatively familiar by the time we get to the opening moments of this battle on the morning of July 1st, 1863. Now, from this vantage point, this becomes a really popular spot for both military figures as well as civilians. There will be people here, really of all stripes, of all backgrounds, making use of this cupola, getting a sense of what is happening off to the western side of Gettysburg. From this vantage point, we really have a wonderful landscape to look over today, just as they had then. And from here, what they would have seen were really the opening moments of this battle at a distance. And as the day goes on, it creeps ever closer to us. Jerome is going to be here seeing a lot of this dust being kicked up earlier in the morning, particularly along the Chambersburg Pike, Gettysburg's main highway running northwest out of the town, one of these 10 roads that makes up this famous kind of the hubs of a wheel or spokes of a wheel. And what he's going to start seeing at about 7:30 in the morning or so on July 1st are what one student, Martin Luther Collard, called the first puffs of smoke from the mouths of booming cannon. They probably couldn't see the initial fighting about 2 miles west of us too well, but that smoke certainly evident. By 8 a.m., Buford's line is withdrawing ridge by ridge, trying to hold on to this series of north-south running terrain features here on the western side of Gettysburg, outnumbered at least 4 to 1 for the first few hours of this action. And by about this time of day, that 9 o'clock hour, directly across this field where we see that next heavy line of trees, you might be able to see a couple of monuments or vehicles, that's the crest of McPherson Ridge. And Buford's line is now withdrawing to that ridge line as Confederate forces continue pressing over each of these ridges, coming down the Chambersburg Pike, and this battle really starts to escalate by about this time.
So, a little bit about Aaron Jerome, because we talk about him, we use his name a lot, but who is this guy? And I think it's important. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the signal corps, and we can kind of go back and forth, but oh, good thing air conditioning quieted a little. We're fighting against wind and we're fighting against air conditioning, so for any reason that we drown out or you can't hear us, just comment on Facebook. We'll try to talk a little louder. We're both loud people, but we can be even louder. But Aaron Jerome is a signal officer. He's a first lieutenant here at Gettysburg, and the Signal Corps had been something that had been established officially by Act of Congress and signed by Abraham Lincoln, March of 1863. It had been the brainchild of this army surgeon named Albert Meyer, who as early as the 1850s is developing a system for using flags to communicate over long distances. And as the Civil War breaks out, this idea of using these flags is picking up more and more traction in the Army. But at before March of 1863, Meyer is relying on drawing men from other commands to come and to learn this pretty intricate system at the time. And these men might be pulled back to their respective commands at any time, but it's not until March that finally he gets through to the proper people and gets this separate corps established. So here at Gettysburg, there are a number of signal officers traveling with all of the different corps of the Union Army, and they're using this system even on the campaign leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg to communicate, but also observe. And part of what was instrumental in the signal corps is that you'd have to be at a very high spot, of course, to signal long distances, and in some cases they're communicating 10, 15 miles. So as part of that, you could also be observers. So Aaron Jerome, at the night of the battle, really doesn't have people to communicate with, but he is able to come up to this spot with his telescope, with this very powerful telescope that would be issued to members of the Signal Corps, and do his observational duties. And as the day goes on, as July 1st, 1863 goes on, more and more people, as the 11th Corps comes up under Oliver Howard, a signal station is set up on Cemetery Hill, and Jerome now has more and more people to communicate with. But he's performing these dual duties, primarily doing the observation here on the morning of July 1st. And I don't know if you have, but Aaron Jerome is sort of this kind of not mythical figure, but just not too much is known about him. He's from New Jersey. He's in the Army in the 1860s through the late 1860s, but leaves in 1870 and kind of fades into obscurity, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, if you look into a little bit of his genealogical background, it appears as though he might have been born in Alabama, orphaned as a child, it seems. His father apparently dies the same year that Jerome is born. I think it's the 1850 census. He appears in what looks like a boarding house sort of situation in New Jersey. And at the start of the Civil War, will enlist in the New Jersey Volunteers as an infantryman before making his way here to the Signal Corps. He'll only live until sometime in the late 1870s, and he dies in San Francisco. As Pete said, kind of fades into obscurity a bit after he leaves the United States Army.
And I would say that two of his major contributions to the Battle of Gettysburg is he is the one that is providing the primary information that we know about Buford here on July 1st. So even though he's sort of this obscure figure overall, his big contribution is putting Buford up here in this cupola on the evening of June 30th and the morning of July 1st. And he writes, you want to talk about the letters?
Sure. So there are two letters that you can find as far as Aaron Jerome's writings. One, the more famous one, I suppose, is written in October 1865. It's a letter to 2nd Corps Commander Winfield Scott Hancock, and basically it comes in response to Hancock having visited Gettysburg in this immediate post-war period. Jerome says that he read a New York newspaper account of Hancock's visit to the town, and he was upset that he didn't really mention John Buford in his travels across the battlefield and his sort of speechifying, as was often the case when veterans visited, especially higher-ranking ones. So he wants to sort of correct the course, if you will. He alerts Hancock in a rather respectful tone, saying maybe you're simply not aware, maybe others are not aware of what exactly General Buford did here at Gettysburg. And he sort of sets this scene. He talks about arriving on June 30th. Buford telling Jerome to seek out the most prominent points and watch everything. He says that he comes up to the cupola, does Jerome, that he's joined by Buford on a couple of occasions. And that 1865 letter is ultimately published in the Batchelder Papers, written by John Batchelder, this collection of papers of really wonderful resources pertaining to the Battle of Gettysburg and the decades that followed it. Winfield Hancock, he hung on to this letter as well. He published it in an article in 1877, I believe it was, in a magazine called The Galaxy. And he directly quotes the entirety of this letter from Aaron Jerome, telling us perhaps something about the significance of it to him personally, that he wants to do good on Jerome's word of keeping Buford's memory alive. The other letter is written 2 years later, in 1867. It is a little fuller. It includes a couple of these most famous lines as far as quotes that are attributed to General Buford. on the night of June 30th, when he purportedly tells Brigade Commander Thomas Devon, they will attack you in the morning, come booming, skirmishers 3 deep. We'll have to fight like the devil to hold this ground until supports arrive. And then perhaps even more famous than that, a line which makes its way into most books on the battle that cover the first day, when John Reynolds arrives here at the seminary, calls up to the cupola and says, "What's the matter, John?" And Buford responds, "There's the devil to pay." That comes to us from Aaron Jerome's 1867 account. That's published in a book by a military historian from New York named James Watts de Peyster. I believe it's out of print now, but that book was reprinted a couple of times. Its initial title is rather interesting as well, Decisive Conflicts of the Late Slaveholders' Rebellion. And inside of it is this essay called The Battle of Oak Ridge by Aaron Jerome, in which he really details a lot of this information.
Good. I want to go back a little to talk about what the students are doing up here, because this is a very prominent point, and as we've been saying, as Buford is saying, as Jerome is saying, this is a prominent point, and there's a feeling I always kind of read into this, a feeling of excitement that some of the townspeople are engaging in on the first day of battle. Lydia Ziegler, who's 12 years old, lives here in the seminary building with her family. She writes later on in life about going out behind the seminary building. She's on the ground, but she goes out and watches the battle unfold, and doesn't come back until a yell from a signal officer in the tower, which probably, I think beyond a shadow of a doubt, is Jerome, sends her scurrying back to the building along with a bullet flying near her head. But people want to see what's going on, so there are students like Martin Luther Culler, who's a seminarian, who comes up here to the cupola. There are students from Gettysburg College, Pennsylvania College, as it's known at the time, Gettysburg College today. But classes are still in session at Pennsylvania College on July 1st, 1863. There are classes still being held in Pennsylvania Hall. And it's H.J. Watkins, who's one of the students there, writes later on in one of the yearbooks that they're in class, and one of his classmates yells up to him from the ground, "Let's go out and see the battle." They come up here to the seminary, they come up to the cupola, and they're standing up here with the signal officer watching the battle unfold. And we have at least 2 accounts where some cannonballs fly beyond the cupola, trying to either get the signal officer or the people up here. And I think in both accounts from Culler and Watkins, they talk about how it sent them scurrying, or it sent them down. I think Watkins says down the walk unceremoniously. So, which Rob Williams, our fearless director of outreach behind the camera, is laughing at that. Yeah, they want to see it, but they definitely don't want to be in danger. So when the going gets tough, they get out of here pretty quickly. So. You have that going on up here. So it must have been pretty crowded up here. I mean, we got 3 people up here right now, and a tripod, and there's room to move around, but not too much. You can imagine with Buford and Jerome and all of these people up here, it must have gotten pretty crowded on the morning of July 1st. Let's talk a little bit about what could you see, what would the view have looked like? What would have been different? Because we've had 157 years of development up here. But talk a little bit about, and I'll look at, if you have any questions, comments, you can feel free. I'll take a moment to check that if you want to talk about what you could see from up here.
So from this vantage point today, of the 4 cardinal directions, the direction in which we're looking right now toward the west is the one that has changed the relative least. The ground around us would be the most significant difference in this direction. So below us today, we have our interpretive trail, we have some sidewalks for the seminary, the parking area, a few early 20th to mid 20th century buildings out here. Basically, the major difference is erasing all of that from the mind's eye, and in their place putting what appears to be largely a grove of trees that came up to approximately the roof of this building in 1863. There are a few photographs taken within a week or so of the battle out at the McPherson farm, several hundred yards northwest of us, by Matthew Brady, looking back in this direction. And really the main thing that you can see at the left side of that image is this thick line of trees, and all that you can really see of this building is the cupola kind of peeking up above that line of foliage. So from the reverse perspective, that tells us that this would have been the primary thing that you would have seen at a difference, was the cupola itself, and thus from it you could have seen over top of those trees to this kind of wide open panoramic perspective that we have today. The most obvious point that we see looking toward the west would be the South Mountain Range in the distance. This is the northern extension of the Blue Ridge Mountains of central Virginia. It is sort of the guide for Robert E. Lee as he moves his 75,000-man Confederate Army in Northern Virginia into Pennsylvania. And when he starts to divide his army and they begin maneuvering through the Cashtown Gap, about 10 miles or so to the west of us, some of those clearings in the distance would mark the approximate location of that gap. And so, as I mentioned a while ago, that's where Aaron Jerome is starting to see a lot of these campfires, the dust's being kicked up, things of that nature. We can make out some of the ridges to the west of Gettysburg as well, though the trees, of course, are a bit thicker today than they would have been 157 years ago. You might be able to see in the distance there is a bright red barn roof that's out on top of Hare Ridge about a mile from here. If you kind of double the distance from here to there, beyond that, 2 miles away, is where Knoxland Ridge is located. So pretty much the tops of the furthest trees past the red roof is about where this first shot of battle was fired. Then we have Hare Ridge, where that 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock roughly period is taking place for Buford's defense, and then McPherson Ridge directly across this field. Now on McPherson Ridge, when the infantry starts to arrive under John Reynolds, cutting across this field very famously is the Iron Brigade, Midwesterners from the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Indiana, and they would have gone into Herbst Woods, as it was then most popularly known. It'd be the thick grove of trees directly across this field. You can probably see a couple of vehicles parked along the ridge line right now, but that would be Herbst Woods. That certainly would have been a visible point from here as well. By about 12 o'clock noon then, a lot of Aaron Jerome's attention is shifting kind of away from this western extent, more toward the northern side of Gettysburg, which would be this open kind of expanse, typically called the Gettysburg Plains. Today it's where Gettysburg College is kind of sprawling across the landscape. East of us would have been a nice view of the town of Gettysburg, and then toward the southeast, that string of hills, Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Ridge, which according to Jerome, Buford starts to notice the importance of whenever he is here in the Cupola in that late morning period on July 1st. And then off toward the south, it's relatively tree covered today, but Jerome mentions when John Reynolds arrived, they could have a nice view of the Emmitsburg Road. He could see the First Corps flag approximately 2 miles distant, I believe he says, is his estimation. So this really kind of sprawling view, especially off toward the west, which we get a really nice sense of even to this day for the most part.
And it's a strategic view. I mean, it's what John Buford and Aaron Jerome are using to inform, especially Buford, to inform the disposition of battle, especially on the evening of June 30th, as Buford is laying out those vedette lines covering the major approaches to the west, north, and east, where he knows Confederate forces are. So we talk about this kind of set, the view from up here really sort of sets the tone for that first day of battle. And I invite, we offer tours where you can come up, and people have come up here and say, you understand the first day now because you can see what they saw and how it helped to make those decisions. You can see most of the roads that are coming in from all points, as Codie's been talking about, and how they sort of center on the town and how important that road network is going to be for whoever controls it to mass their army, to bring the disparate elements of their army here. So it's a strategic view. You get down on the ground and you can see the undulations in the ground, and that really lends the tactical view. That's important too. That's going to be important in different parts of the battle. But from up here on the evening of June 30th, they're trying to get, in the morning of July 1st, you're trying to look at kind of this holistic view. And that's what lends its importance to what's going on up here. So we have people watching from Annapolis, from Massachusetts. We thank you. You're up here in the Cupola on July 1st, 2020, the 157th anniversary of the battle. We're talking about John Buford and his signal officer, Aaron Jerome. If you have questions, comments, please like. We have people from Massachusetts, Rockville, New Jersey, my home state, Pittsburgh, Ellicott City, Maryland. Thank you for watching. Thank you for joining us. One of the questions that we got is from our good friend Linda, who says better than yesterday. So your windscreen is working, Rob.
Hey, all right.
What happens to Buford's men as the infantry arrives?
So from this vantage point, Aaron Jerome really has a front row seat to kind of what is happening for Buford's division's sake. We have this famous moment I'll kind of lead off with to give some context here, of Reynolds arriving on the campus, meeting with Buford somewhere in or around this building, having this little conference in front of this building, it seems, and then eventually going out toward the McPherson Farm. For those familiar with where their monuments are today, that general vicinity out along the Chambersburg Pike. And then we would have seen from here Reynolds probably going back and getting his men down toward the Emmitsburg Road. And then we would have seen this broad movement of the 1st Division under James Wadsworth making its way here to the western side of Gettysburg, basically to replace Buford's beleaguered cavalrymen as they are starting to withdraw from McPherson's Ridge. They're running low on ammunition. They've been fighting for the better part of 3 hours. And now they're really starting to break, and in the nick of time is when Reynolds' troops get here. So across this field we see Lysander Cutler's brigade, Solomon Meredith's Iron Brigade, and what you'll essentially notice from that point is the movement of Buford's troops back to the flanks of the army. These mobile cavalrymen who are, of course, on horseback, fighting dismounted, but they will mount up in their movements for the most part. The Fairfield or Hagerstown Road to the southwest of us is a point of concern for Buford. On June 30th, he had encountered Confederate forces at the village of Fairfield itself, so he knows that's a possible point of attack. Reynolds was especially concerned throughout June 30th and July 1st with Confederate forces coming from that western direction. But as well, we have the roads on the northern side of town through those Gettysburg plains leading to the towns of Mummersburg and the cities of Carlisle and Harrisburg. And altogether, Buford's line on the evening of June 30th had looked like it was kind of sprawling in this upside-down U shape across these roads branching out in those directions. Now that he has the infantry support that he needs, we'll start to see the emphasis go back toward those flanks as well. By about 12 o'clock noon, Aaron Jerome in the Cupola starts to notice the lead elements of Robert Rhodes' Confederate division coming down the roads on the northern side of the college. And he will send a dispatch in some fashion, whether by flag, by personal message, by courier, to Cemetery Hill. He's going to direct it to General Oliver Howard. And it says something to the effect of, there's about a mile-long line of skirmishers on our right and nothing but cavalry to oppose it. And so that gives us a nice sense as well of the kind of main areas on the northern side of town, toward Oak Ridge, Mummersburg Road, that these rebel foot soldiers are now starting to press back Buford's cavalry. And then as the day wears on and the infantry fight escalates both west and north of town, by the time we get to late afternoon, the Confederate Army is starting to overrun these positions. Buford's men will have one final role to play, and that is in the Union retreat effort through the town and the defense here of Seminary Ridge, down toward Fairfield Road behind a low stone fence. The men of William Gamble's brigade are going to confront the right end of the Confederate attack as it is making its way here towards Seminary Ridge. After July 1st, then, Buford's men are pulled off of the effective battlefield. They're put down toward the Union left flank along Emmitsburg Road in the vicinity of the Peach Orchard. And then they're eventually going to leave Gettysburg, go down to Westminster, Maryland, and guard supply wagons, their duty having been done here most effectively on the morning of July 1st. I think as an important aside to that, Aaron Jerome oftentimes gets lost in this shuffle as well. He will not initially depart Gettysburg with Buford's division, though of course he had arrived with them. Rather, Jerome is going to play, we could say, maybe an equally important role on July 2nd as what he did here on July 1st at the seminary by going to Little Round Top. And he'll be part of the Signal Corps contingent upon that hill whenever Gouverneur Warren, Chief Engineer of the United States Army of the Potomac, is there observing the advance of Confederates on the second day. The last point that I would make on that is if you go to Little Round Top today, behind Warren's statue is the Signal Corps tablet, dedicated in 1919. One of the names you will see on there is A.B. Jerome, and that is the Jerome who was here in the Cupola with Buford's division.
We're doing our own little bit of work to try to resurrect the role of the Signal Corps here at the Battle of Gettysburg. If you go into the ORs, the official records, you can see some of these messages that are sent by Signal Corps. Usually they're a lot They're a lot more succinct and curt in their sending. They're not sort of embellished with the your obedient servant or even having ranks on there necessarily of the people that are sending these messages. I know the one that he sends from up here, and then also the one on Little Round Top, I think is just signed Jerome. He doesn't even put A.B. Jerome or First Lieutenant or Signal Officer. So you know, you can go back and you can kind of piece together what might be sent by flag, what's sent by traditional courier. But it really sort of it's a better way of communicating instead of having to. And when we do this exercise with students, we talk about, you know, how long would it take to get a message from here to Emmitsburg, Maryland? How fast can a horse travel? You got to find the person, wait for the response, get the response, travel back. Whereas with a flag, it's going to take a little bit of time, but you can send the same message span of an hour maybe if with the right conditions. One of the questions that we get most frequently up here, what is it going to be?
Was Lee in the Cupola?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get that a lot because, of course, on the afternoon of July 1st, and if you follow us throughout the day with the videos that we're going to be doing, we're going to be talking about this area around the seminary being turned into what I like to refer to as the Confederate Nerve Center, where a lot of the decisions are going to be made that are going to affect what the Confederate Army is doing on July 2nd and July 3rd. But yes, we get that question probably just... our most frequent question is, where's the bathroom?
Yes.
Second most frequent question, where is Robert E. Lee, and does he use the cupola?
So the basis of this story, as best I can tell, the idea that Lee used the cupola, first would be the proximity to his headquarters. We are just a couple hundred yards south of the famous Mary Thompson House and this Confederate headquarters complex and its environs. So it just sort of makes sense that if you were Lee, this is maybe an ideal location. The other thing that really kind of lends itself to this idea is a brief account that is written in 1909, 46 years after the battle, by Levi Graham. He was a Pennsylvania veteran of the famous Bucktail Brigade under Roy Stone, who was himself not a wounded soldier, but he was captured bringing a wounded comrade into this building on July 1st. And he would later recall, I believe it's the afternoon of July 3rd, that he says that he was in the cupola and that Robert E. Lee and another officer under Lee came here, and they had this brief little conversation where apparently this officer asks the man where he thinks the lines are, or asks Graham where he thinks the lines are, and he says, "We'll whip you too, Yank," is one of the lines in this account. It is the only account of its sort. We can't really corroborate it with anything else more contemporary, especially based on the fact that Robert E. Lee is one of those figures where at Gettysburg and most other battlefields, you can almost trace him at any given time as far as where he is. So curious that if he were in fact here, no one closer to him reflected upon that fact. There is also the story of Lee having used the cupola at Pennsylvania Hall at the college. That's written by Michael Jacobs in a book called Notes on the Rebel Invasion of Maryland and Pennsylvania. There appears to be this confusion by veterans in the first couple of decades after the battle. What was the seminary? What was the college? That's another possibility in terms of how this building and this cupola might have been mistaken for that one. But in the end, what we can basically say is that the evidence does not strongly suggest Lee's presence here. It's possible, but not probable, based on what we know.
Good party line. So what else do we have to talk about? Talked about the Signal Corps role, the strategic view. I'm looking at my notes down here, what you would have seen, the students and the excitement. The building is going to be turned into a field hospital. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And under the covenants of war at the time, should not, again, we're using those qualifying words, should not have been used for military purposes. That's another thing about Lee. Maybe not using this, and again talking about the strategic and the tactical view. What kind of view is Lee needing on July 2nd and July 3rd? And you can go to the end of the campus here and very clearly see Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and see the undulations in the ground, which for Lee's purposes maybe would have been more important than seeing the kind of more strategic view like Buford and Jerome needed on the day before in the morning of the battle. One thing that we didn't talk about, that maybe this is a good thing to kind of wrap up on, unless there are any more questions, what's the purpose? Why is there a cupola here? Why is there a cupola on this building?
Sure, so it's for a couple of different reasons. Partly aesthetic, the federal style era when this was constructed, kind of at the late end of that era of architecture. It is this kind of ornamental piece. As you look at the building from the front or back, it's symmetrical and it has this kind of crowning feature at the top of it. From a more kind of working standpoint, as far as something that this could have been used for, airflow is a big thing for cupolas, 18th, 19th century especially. If you go to most college campuses that have an old main or an old dorm, a lot of times they have these sort of structures on top of them. Large buildings that had large numbers of people within them, a good way to get air through the building is so that it would escape through the top and hypothetically cool down the lower floors. That brings into question, what was the exact design of the building? Was there a central staircase, which appears to be rather likely? Aaron Jerome mentions that there was a ladder going to the cupola, so that would have all gone into this idea that it was this more kind of open airway of sorts. There is also the idea that if you look at a lot of early etchings of this building from 1840s, 50s, usually the artist would depict someone in the cupola, which would suggest that perhaps this was, even before this became a battlefield, a location from which seminary students or locals maybe got a sense of this wonderful Adams County surroundings around us, because it is, of course, a very picturesque view, even aside from its extremely significant historical importance as well.
And we have tried it. It does help with airflow. If you open the cupola and open the doors to the attic here on either side, you can definitely feel the air coming up through the stairwells in the building. So we have tried that function, and it works pretty well. And we also have to think about, I like that you brought up the idea of being able to observe the Adams County countryside. One of the reasons that the seminary is this building, which is the building that's constructed in 1832 as the permanent home of the seminary, is set outside of town. Today it might not seem like outside of town, but in 1832 and 1863 this was really sort of the western edges of Gettysburg. The town proper didn't start until about really kind of a half-mile away, and it was an area where Samuel Simon Schmucker, who's the founder, wants it to be a place where it's removed from the distractions of the town, the distractions of people, where seminary students can come and concentrate on their studies, and even people who are here in the 1830s are writing about it. It's a very beautiful, picturesque place to shut out the world and to really concentrate on learning to be a Lutheran minister. Now that's going to get really turned around in a very real way, of course, on the morning of July 1st, but says a little bit about maybe why this was placed up here and how it was used in those early years. Any final thoughts?
I just wanted to make a brief note on kind of legacy of the use of the cupola for much the same purposes that we use it today, to get an understanding of what happened here. And that is something that happens pretty much immediately. In the fall of 1863, the dedication of Soldiers National Cemetery, of course with the words of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The evening before the dedication, November 18th, 1863, there is a reporter who apparently lodged in this building for that night. He couldn't find a hotel in town, from the Cincinnati Daily Commercial. And when he comes to the cupola, he has this little section called General View from the Seminary, and he details what exactly this landscape looked like. And he says that no visitor to Gettysburg should fail to visit this important location and get a better understanding. Much that same thing will be said in 1873, the 10-year anniversary of the battle. John Batchelder's Gettysburg, What to See and How to See It. He says that basically from no other point can a visitor get quite the view that they get here. Veterans will use this position. George McFarland, who was the last patient to leave the seminary hospital, lost a leg in this building. And Reverend Dr. Charles Hay, a seminary professor, on what I believe is right before the 3rd anniversary of the battle in 1866, carries George McFarland here to the cupola. So this is a really significant location for the men who fought here, for those who were here in the immediate aftermath of the battle and of the Civil War, to get a sense of this terrain, to get a sense of what happened from this vantage point. It is one of the rare places at Gettysburg we can stand in one central spot and see large pieces of each of the 3 days of battle, the movement into Pennsylvania and away from it. And it's one of the rare locations on almost any American Civil War battlefield that you can enter a man-made structure that was once used as an observation post by both civilians and officers of the military alike, and get a better sense and a better understanding of what they saw and the decisions that they made from the point where they made them. The last point that I want to make then is just on Buford's appreciation for what Aaron Jerome did here. Buford himself never mentions this building or this cupola in his official report, lending some people to believe, the veracity of some of Jerome's accounts. But he does have this really interesting line that does seem to corroborate most of what Jerome says, where he says that Jerome was ever on the alert, and he cites his intrepidity and fine skills. And he says that he was, using Jerome's signal telescope, and he thanks him directly for that. We know that he was here, of course. And Buford will die on December 16th, 1863, just about 5 months after this battle. Just a little less than a month before he died, I believe it's November 20th, he writes a letter to Aaron Jerome where he says he has his full endorsement of the United States Signal Corps, and I believe he directly cites what he did during the Gettysburg campaign to back that up. So all of that kind of suggesting to us the importance of this location, the people who were in it, the views that they had, the decisions that they made from this exact spot 157 years ago.
And you can come up and see this view yourself and to feel the breeze, the gentle breeze. And we offer tours. This is the first time as this museum was open, one of the first times in 50 years, 60 years, 70 years that you can actually come up and see this view. We're only showing you the view to the west, but there's a great view, a great perspective of the borough of Gettysburg, looking towards the east. So we offer tours 6-7 times a day during the summer. The museum is back open now with COVID-19 precautions in place. We're open Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. We are open today and tomorrow to recognize the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. So if you are in town, please come by. Come up here, see the view that Buford and Jerome saw from up here in this cupola. We're going to sign off now for a little while. Codie and Caleb will be back at 10 o'clock talking about the approach of the Iron Brigade here across the seminary grounds on July 1st going into Herbst Woods. I'll be talking a little bit about the building turning into a hospital. And then we're going to take a little break during the middle of the day, but we will be back at 4 and 5 o'clock tonight talking about the important actions that take place at the barricade of rails behind this building at about 4 o'clock on July 1st, and then the seminary grounds turning into what I like to call, again, the Confederate Nerve Center. So join us. We'll be here almost all day talking about the importance of July 1st, bringing you some of those interesting interpretations and stories from Seminary Ridge on July 1st. And again, like this, share it with your friends, comment. If you have any questions that we didn't answer, we'll be going back throughout the day and trying to address those. And we thank you for joining us and hope to see you up on the ridge soon.